There's a moment when celebration stops feeling like celebration, not publicly, not obviously, but somewhere in the background. Someone who had been part of the program for decades quietly decided they were done, not after a loss, not after a scandal, but after a jersey was retired. And what makes that moment unsettling isn't the criticism itself, it's when it happened, because timing like that usually means something already shifted long before anyone said it out loud in the jersey retirement.
Yeah, so Yahoo Sports just put this article out because I seen dude talking about CoachPrime, and I didn't really think it was a big deal because for the simple fact, they always be talking about CoachPrime. Like, this starting to turn into the normal with these former players. But it's being reported that Shedeur Sanders' jersey retirement was a breaking point for Colorado legend. Now, if you guys don't know, Shedeur Sanders' jersey was retired along with Travis Hunter year before last at Folsom Field. Now, it went on to say Shedeur Sanders' jersey retirement was a breaking point at the Colorado legend. Originally appeared on the sports news, add the sporting news as preferred to, and it stated the retirement of Shedeur Sanders' number 2 jersey was meant to be a celebrated moment for Colorado. Instead, it continues to point out,
may have just exposed it when a jersey is retired. The message is supposed to be simple. It's supposed to close debate. It turns a player into history. It removes uncertainty. It tells everyone this mattered, but in this case, something unusual happened because instead of ending a conversation, it seemed to start one, according to reporting referenced in the transcript. Shedeur Sanders' number 2 jersey was retired at Colorado. The ceremony was meant to be a celebrated moment for the program publicly. That's exactly what it was, but privately, and then eventually publicly, it triggered a reaction from someone who had already been watching closely, a former Colorado tight end, a national champion, someone deeply tied to the program's identity, and his response wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. He said he officially tapped out when the jersey was retired, not when the team struggled, not when coaching changes happened, not when the culture shifted, when the jersey was retired. And he didn't frame it as anger, he framed it as a decision. That distinction matters because anger is reactive, decision is deliberate. He went further, he questioned the coaching itself. He said he didn't like the way DeionSanders coaches football. He said he didn't believe in the substance behind the visibility. But here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. He also said something else. He said criticism gets labeled as hateful. That's a very specific observation because it suggests that in his view, disagreement wasn't being processed as disagreement, it was being processed as opposition. And when people inside a program start feeling like disagreement itself isn't welcomed, that's usually not about one moment, it's about accumulation. The jersey retirement didn't create the tension, it revealed where people already stood. But what makes this moment different isn't just that he said it, it's that he said it now, because timing like this often reflects something else happening beneath the surface, something that hasn't fully played out yet. Programs don't just operate on wins and losses, they operate on identity, and identity isn't controlled entirely by results. It's controlled by perception, by symbolism, by decisions that signal what the program values now compared to what it valued before. When DeionSanders arrived at Colorado, everything changed quickly. Visibility, increased attention, increased support, increased. The transcript even describes stadiums filling with people who hadn't been part of the traditional audience before. That kind of change brings energy, but it also creates something else, contrast, because when identity shifts quickly, people who were part of the previous identity are forced into a new position, not necessarily against it, but no longer at the center of it. And when that happens, symbolic decisions take on more meaning than intended. Retiring a jersey isn't just about honoring one player, it's about defining what the program considers historic. It's about defining which era matters most, and when that happens during a period of rapid change, it can feel less like recognition and more like transition. Not everyone processes that transition the same way. Some embrace it, some observe it, some distance themselves from it. And sometimes distancing doesn't happen loudly, it happens quietly with statements like, I tapped out, not protesting, not arguing, just stepping away. That kind of response usually doesn't happen because of one decision alone. It happens when someone believes the direction has already been decided and they no longer see themselves inside it. What's important here isn't whether the criticism is right or Wrong, it's that it exists at all because programs tend to monitor internal perception very closely, not just among players, but among former players' alumni voices. Connected to legacy because those voices shape continuity, and when those voices begin separating themselves from current direction, it introduces something subtle, not instability, but divergence, a difference between where the program is going and where parts of its history expected it to go in divergence. If it continues, tends to create decisions that look small in the moment, but later define entire eras. The jersey retirement might have been intended to close a chapter, but the reaction to it suggests it may have opened one instead. What makes moments like this difficult to evaluate is that nothing visible changes immediately. Games still happen, programs still operate, public support still exists, but internally, perception begins adjusting, not all at once, gradually, because programs don't just manage players, they manage narratives, they manage expectation, they manage belief, and belief isn't static, it evolves based on signals. The transcript describes something else worth paying attention. Toit mentions that criticism of DeionSanders had been happening behind the scenes for years, not publicly amplified, but present. That matters because when criticism remains private, it doesn't influence public perception, but once it becomes public, it changes the environment around decision-making, not necessarily in dramatic ways, but in subtle ones. It changes how future decisions are interpreted, changes how every symbolic move is received, it changes how stability is perceived, and stability in football isn't just about roster continuity, it's about narrative continuity. Programs function best when identity, leadership, and perception move in the same direction. When they diverge, even slightly, it introduces friction, not destructive friction, but pressure that influences timing, pressure that influences messaging, pressure that influences how carefully future moves are made. Because once divergence exists, every decision carries more weight, not because the decision itself is larger, but because interpretation becomes more sensitive, and interpretation often shapes reality long before results do. The former player didn't say the program would fail, he explicitly said he wants them to succeed. That distinction matters because it means the criticism isn't rooted in opposition to success, it's rooted in perception of direction, and direction in football often determines outcome long before outcome becomes visible, but direction isn't always obvious in real time. It reveals itself through reactions, through language, through timing, through moments like this one, which raises a quieter question, not about whether the jersey should have been retired, but about why that moment was the one that made someone who had been watching for years decide that they were done watching. Programs change long before standings reflect it, not in wins, not in losses, but in perception, in who feels included, in who feels aligned, in who quietly steps away. The jersey retirement was meant to define history, but it may have also defined something else, something still unfolding. And usually, when reactions like this surface, they're not the beginning of the story, they are the part that becomes visible after the story has already started, and the next signal usually doesn't look important when it happens until later.